All right, we encapsulated some data and a behavior around employees inside this employee class. Beautiful. However, this implementation has a problem. What if I come here and set the base salary to 0 or a negative number? Our employee object is going to go in a bad state, and it's not going to be able to produce the right result. It's not going to be able to calculate the wage properly. But you might say, Mosh, we shouldn't set the base salary to a negative number to start with. And I totally agree with you. But what if we read these values from the user? So here we need to do some data validation. We want to make sure that the base salary that the user enters is a positive value. Now, here's one way to solve this problem. We can write an if statement, get the base salary from the user interface, and then check to see if it's a negative number. If this condition is true, then we're going to print an error message. However, the problem with this implementation is that every time we use the employee object, we'll have to write this if statement. We don't want to do that. We want to encapsulate this logic inside the employee class. Here's how we're going to do it. What if we hide this field so it's not accessible outside of the employee class, and instead we declare a method like set base salary. So we pass this value to this method, and we can do our data validation inside this method. Because this method is part of the employee class, wherever we use this class, we're going to have this data validation logic. So we don't have to repeat it all over the place. So let's go back to our employee class. Earlier we talked about access modifiers. We have declared this field as public, and this means that this field is accessible outside of this class. Now, if I change this to private, see what happens. Back to the main class. We have a compilation error here because the base salary field is private and it's not accessible outside of the employee class. Okay, so that was our first step. Now we need to create this method. So back to this class, let's add a new method here. Public void set base salary. Here we can add a parameter like base salary. And in this method, we're going to do some data validation. So before we set the base salary field, we want to validate this parameter. So if base salary is less than or equal to 0, here we want to throw an exception. So we use the throw statement to raise an exception, and this will cause our program to terminate. So to do that, we need to create a new instance of the illegal argument exception. We're going to talk about exceptions in the future. For now, all you need to know is that all these exceptions are classes in Java library. When we throw an exception, that exception, if not handled, will terminate our program. So here we're creating a new instance of this class. Over here, we can pass an error message to show to the user. Salary cannot be 0 or less. All right. So if this base salary is invalid, we're not going to set our field. Otherwise, we're going to write this, that base salary equals base salary. Now back to our main class. Let's run our program and see what happens. So here's our exception. It terminated our program. As you can see, the type of this exception is illegal argument exception. And here's the error message. Salary cannot be 0 or less. So with this method, we're preventing an employee object from going to an invalid state. Now, what if you want to read the value of base salary? With the current implementation, we cannot access this field from the outside. So if we type employee.baseSalary, we get a compilation error. How can we read this value and print it on the console? Well, we can create a similar method like getBaseSalary, and this will return the value of that field. So back to our employee class, let's create a new method, public integer getBaseSalary. We don't need any parameters here. We simply return the value of the base salary field. These methods you see here are very common in Java. We refer to them as setters and getters because we use them to set or get the value of a field. So in Java, we want to make our fields private, and instead we want to add getters and setters to work with them. I'm going to explain the reason in the next lecture. Now here's an exercise for you. I want you to follow the steps that I did in this lecture and create a getter and a setter for the hourly rate field. Make it private so it's not accessible from the outside, and then go back to the main class and make the necessary changes. You'll see my solution next. All right, let me show you a trick. I'm not going to manually create a getter and a setter. I'm going to ask IntelliJ to automatically create these for me using a shortcut. So with the cursor on this field, look at this light bulb. We can activate this by clicking it or pressing Alt and Enter. Now look at the first item, encapsulate field, hourly rate. Let's go with that. In this dialog box, you can see the fields we have in this class. The first field is the base salary, which is not selected. This field already has a getter and a setter. Now look at the second field. That's our hourly rate. This field is selected, and here IntelliJ is suggesting to create a getter and a setter for this field with these names. Now here we can tell IntelliJ if we want both a getter and a setter. Sometimes we want a read-only field, so we can only create a getter. In that case, we will untick the setter, okay? Now for this exercise, we want to keep both of them. Below this, we can tell IntelliJ how to change the access modifier of this field after this refactoring. So as you can see, IntelliJ is going to automatically make this field private, and our access modifiers are going to be public. Now let's click on the refactor button down below. There you go. So this field is now private. We have a getter. There you go, get hourly rate. Here we're simply returning the value of this field. And this is our setter. Currently, we don't have any data validation. We can add it like this. If hourly rate is less than or equal to 0, once again, we can throw a new illegal argument exception. And we can say hourly rate cannot be 0 or negative. There you go. So learn these shortcuts. They're very easy. They're very helpful for generating code, so you don't have to type everything by hand. Now back to our main class. Let's set the base salary to 50,000 and the hourly rate to 20. Now do you see what happened here? IntelliJ automatically replaced our field assignment statement with a call to the set hourly rate method. This is extremely powerful. So if there are 5 places where we are directly working with that field, we don't have to go back and manually change all those places. All right, so this is all about getters and setters in Java.